Hey, we're jumping back into the second part of our series here. Give me just a second to pull that slide up. But, just in review, we talked last time about how we're in the fourth industrial revolution, and we talked a little bit about C.S. Lewis's book, The Evolution of Man. And just kind of we talked about how sometimes when you're in between a space, like when you're stuck between what was the past and also seeing the future, it can be challenging. And you feel like you're maybe at an airport or at a bus stop, and you've already left one destination, but you quite haven't quite got to the next destination, and you're kind of stuck at the hub or at the airport getting ready to get on that next airplane or that next leg of the journey. And the reality is, sometimes a vehicle that got you to one place isn't a vehicle that's going to get you to the next place. And as a thinker, a critical thinker, maybe you're a college student at OSU, or Otterbein, or somewhere here in Columbus, or you're somebody's watching our growing YouTube community, you've got to think ahead. And so, again, sometimes what got you one place won't always get you to the next place, right? So, an example of that is, if you're going to go, let's say you live in the United States and you want to go to Europe, you're going to drive probably first in a car to an airport. But you can't drive over the pond, over the ocean to get to Europe. You actually have to change the kind of vehicle that you use, get on an airplane to go to the next level. And so, those kinds of scaling things and metaphors are important for these discussions. And so sometimes when people have to leave one place and they're looking to go to the next place, there's a little bit of a mourning process. There's a little bit of a disappointment because the past was a good place for some, not for everybody. Sometimes people are excited to move on and they're not excited to stay in the past. And I would just remind us that the past is a point of reference, not a place of residence. And Ecclesiastes is great at reminding us that there's a time for everything. There's a season of every activity under the heavens. There's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build. And so sometimes, I'm pausing here in the verse, sometimes there's a time to go, you know what, I'm going to cut my losses and I need to move on. So, in accounting, there's something called sunk costs. And sunk costs are terrible for innovation because people often feel like, hey, we got to keep sinking more money into this project, even though it's a dying cause. And so there's a time to tear down and a time to build. There's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. And one of the things I love about the Old Testament in Hebrews, in Western culture, when we can't figure something out, we don't know something, we get frustrated. We're like, oh, I'm so mad I don't know this. And in the innovation in Jewish life is that when they don't know something, especially when they don't know something about God, they actually dance because they are recognizing that they don't know right now, they don't know yet, but at some point they're going to know. And that gets them excited because they know they're on the leading edge of innovation. It continues, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. There's a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. And so, as we're in that space of the in between, when it's the parallel and you're trying to move from one parallel to the other, that is it's emotionally, it's challenging. We've got to work through those emotions and process those emotions. We don't run from our emotions. We don't stuff our emotions. We're also not subject to our emotions. We got to have a method and a strength in this space to kind of process and then move with passion in the right direction. So I think it's time for us as followers of Jesus to build parallel structures. What's a parallel structure? Well, a parallel structure or an organization uses a number of things. It needs help to develop these kinds of things, but there are cross-functional networks. This is groups of people different systems with members that can synthesize subject expertise and giftedness, along with just representation for the benefit of everyone. And so I want to encourage you in anything that you do. You want to build margin, you also want to build parallel. And so our organization, Nexus Community, we've created three things. We've created a church structure. We've also created a parallel structure that is a nonprofit structure. And we've also created a for-profit arm. And this is really just the beginning. We're a small enterprise. We're a small group of about 30 people as a church, maybe a little bigger depending on the Sunday, who's there, who's present in our circle. But beyond that, we have hundreds and hundreds of people that receive our letters and are interested in what we're doing online. And some of you are just catching in now with our YouTube channel. But we're building these structures, and our goal, our desire is actually this idea of Nexus is to build a number of structures in multiple cities because we see the some of the old structures and the old ways are not working. And I think part of it is there's an expiration date to every innovation. And so we're trying to innovate, and we need help to really go to the next level. But I'm trying to build a theological, but also a practical just framework for some of the stuff we're talking about. So what exactly are we talking about when we talk about the parallel? We're talking about structures that are in harmony with the values of the people that create them. So at Nexus, we want a collaborative, a contextual, spaces that are co-led, civic, but unashamedly Christian parallels. And we want those alternatively. So there's a reason that we spent a lot of money at the beginning in building some legal structures that allow us to collaborate with really anybody. So we haven't burned bridges in that process. We're part of a denomination, but we also have independent structures that go along that process. I've personally worked with everyone from pastors to AI creators to people that have, built incredible, real estate developments and businesses and things like that. And so this idea of the parallel structure, I've talked before in some of our other sessions on this idea of the city of God. And Augustine was famous for saying that there were two loves that built two cities. One was the love of self, and one was selfless love. And we really want to try to create more of that city of God kind of structure. It's complicated, right? It's not as easy. But here's what Thessalonians says. It says, "Yet we urge you, brothers and sisters, to do so more and more, and to make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. You should mind your own business and work with your hands, just as we told you, so that your daily life might win the respect of outsiders, so that you will not be dependent on anybody." And so I think one of the major frameworks, economic frameworks even, that's bound up in the New Testament is this idea of freedom. And I think the closer you get to Jesus, the more your rights fall away. But I think as you do that, you actually experience greater and greater blessing and greater freedom. And you're not dependent upon anyone. And we want to continue to expand and just grow that reality. Okay? And so we do want dependence. That dependence is on Christ and us as a community of faith. So we're called, all of us are called to bring value to our culture, but our framework for that is to be like Joseph in a crisis. But our framework for that is to value the Sabbath and to not fall into workaholism. And that's a big value just based on the Old Testament and New Testament. Okay? So we want to start small. We want to have margin. We want to practice Sabbath. We want to have critical thinking. But we want to seek freedom, and we want to create freedom for others as well. So listen to this. As you listen, don't fear what's being said. So Dr. Pippa Malmgren, an economist, a former U.S. presidential advisor, speaking at the World Economic Forum 3 years ago, said, "We are about to abandon the traditional system of money and accounting and introduce a new one. It will be digital. It means having an almost perfect record of every single transaction that happens in the economy, which will give us greater clarity over what's happening at the local and global economy. So it doesn't sound bad on the face of it, a prima facie of it. However, the potential here is massive, and it could mean a further growth of a surveillance state. And so, as we think about growing the practical, growing the parallel, we have to think about the minutia and the smallness of that. So, theologically and practically, when we begin these conversations about tools and about revolution and about all these things, we're not talking about anything that's an overthrow. We're talking about things that are changes in the way we think about things. So whether it's crypto or it's about certain science or AI, whatever it is, we have to start from a theological and practical perspective. So Dr. Seuss is famous for saying a person is a person, no matter how small, right? And so you got to start from the very innocent and undeveloped, immature space. And as you step into purpose, you begin thinking about what are the implications of my ethics. That really impacts how you think about what we do. Then you begin employing tools. And so a tool is it's simply something that you employ practically. And that tool creates value as it allows you to speed up a process, or it allows you to do something that you were not able to do without it. And so when you begin employing tools, you begin to realize there are a number of tools, or you discover there are tools needed to be created. And so, as that's related to our conversation, there is a great book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. It was written in 1962 by a scientist named Thomas Kuhn, who's an influential physicist and philosopher. And he wrote this book, and he introduced the world to a concept called the paradigm shift. And the paradigm shift is simply this idea that when you begin thinking together differently about a problem or a project, and you begin to see it differently, I think he called it a gestalt shift. There's a shift in how everyone begins to think about a problem. And that problem actually creates new questions, better questions, and innovation. And so, again, tools and paradigms. A tool is the application of an idea that one can use to create value. Okay, so a tool is the application. So, like a shovel, the shovel isn't about a shovel, the shovel is about designing a hole. Why would you need a hole? Well, you need it for a number of reasons. But when you think about, hey, I need some space in the ground here, your brain goes to a tool. Why is that? Because you've been exposed to those kinds of tools in an application of environment. And in our world today, we still have an industrial mindset when it comes to tools, and we've niched people into specific areas. And we said, this is the area you use these tools in. So if you're an engineer, you use specific tools in engineering. If you're a digital designer, you use tools that are digital. If you're medical, you use clinical tools or medical tools, okay? And so the application demonstrates the usefulness of an idea, and it determines its meaning in terms of its social value, its potential capital, and its novelty. Okay, so a medical tool, for example, is very valuable because of what it does. So tools can sometimes actually create more tools. I was sort of alluding to that around them, and these actually become industries. Okay, so you can think of a shovel as an example that eventually becomes the caterpillar, right? The caterpillar has a massive bucket that pulls a bunch of dirt up on it. Well, that also creates its own industry. The car creates a tire industry, or the oil change industry, right? There's a number of oil change places literally in Columbus that's the only thing that they do is they change oil. That's what tools do. And so we've seen this before, and we've seen kind of the reality of what God wants to do with humanity when it comes to designing and it comes to exposure to our innocence, and it comes to our humanity. Here's what it says in Exodus 3. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians and bring them up out of that land into a land that is good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So what is God saying here? He's saying, I have observed, I have heard, I know, and now I'm coming to rescue them. And it continues in Exodus 4. This is what happens now. Moses is encountering God. I think really this is the first moment of a human being encountering sacred space. And Moses answers and he says to God, he says, God, what if they don't believe me or listen to me and say the Lord did not appear to you? And the Lord said to him, what's in your hand? Okay, here now we're talking about a tool. A staff, he replied. And the Lord said, throw it on the ground. Moses threw it on the ground. It became a snake, and he ran from it. And the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. So Moses reached out his hand and let's see what it says, and a hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. And so just a couple of observations here. When we talk about starting small, we talk about using what's in your hand. What do you have now in the moment to move to the next level? So Moses had a stick. Well, what did that stick represent? Well, it represented Moses' exile from Egypt in one sense, and the fact that he had become a shepherd. And so that staff represented his income, it represented his provision. And I don't want to get into all of it, but it also represents, when he would lay it down, represent the laying down of the life of the shepherd. And it was this idea of that as long as Moses held onto it in his own power, it was dead. But every time he would lay it down, God would make it come alive with life. And it was God, his mighty power, and Moses' outstretched arm. You have divinity and you have human agency at work. There's an interplay here. And that's important for us as an innovative community and where we're going together. But you got to start somewhere, and that's what Moses did. He started small. Then you have to ask yourself, am I using what I have to create good value? Okay. So am I taking the raw resources that I have, whatever that is, and am I using it to create value? So there's a consumption versus a creation question here. Are you using your resources for consumption, or are you using them for creation? And let me be clear. I think the Sabbath is a perfect example that God really does want us to practice the sovereignty of God, and he wants us to practice joy and not being a slave to our work, right? That's the whole point of the Sabbath, and we don't want to be sucked back into that workaholism. And so the Sabbath should be one where you really learn how to party, right? You got to learn how to party, and you got to have joy. That's what the Sabbath is for, is learning how to play. And so there's a space for consumption, and I think that's important. I think it actually creates innovation when we do that. But also, have you surrendered what's in your hand to God? And this is a stewardship question. It's a finance question, but it's also just a general time question. I think when we surrender those things to God, God innovates on our innovation. God takes what we did for 4 or 5 or 6 days, and he adds the 7th day to it. And it's powerful because his divine design is at work. So what else? You have to ask yourself these questions, and these are questions, again, you could ask at your table. Then you got to ask yourself, what tools, what other things can you do to create more margin? For some people, that's a calendar, and calendars are kind because they create clarity, and it's critical to have a clean calendar. But what tools do you have that create value for you, and then what other tools do you need? You need to create a roadmap of whatever it is that you want to do. Okay? So I think this is a good stopping point. But I will just conclude by saying, I have in my garage a number of tools. And sometimes those tools are used the right way, and sometimes they're used the wrong way. And a tool used the wrong way often breaks the tool. And I would just encourage you as innovators to think about good uses for tools and bad uses for tools or improper uses for tools as you have these conversations with your group. Okay, so you can go back in the slides, you can take screenshots of these, and then discuss it in your group together. And I'll be back for one more session after this one.